if you actually put in a budget of 4,000, you actually use 3,000, then you actually get charged less. You actually get, if on the okay, you use only 3,000, you still get charged for 4,000, so you actually lose. Okay, you put in for 8,000, you use 9,000, I'm just charging you for 8,000, you use more, right? You lied to me. You lied to me, you used more than what you promised. But I'm still only allocating costs associated with the budget. So we don't really, so my point is, you don't want to base all the allocations based on budgeted usage, yes? Because you have game playing. Because people will tend to do what? Say they want to use this much and then they actually use that much. Okay, because then they only get allocated at this level. Okay, so number one, you can write this down. The worst thing to do is to allocate on budgeted usage because it encourages lying, it encourages game playing. Okay, all right, so we just want to avoid total reliance on allocating based on the budgeted usage. Okay, so we want to move towards the point of accuracy. What do we do? Well, one point of accuracy is that we allocate variable costs based on actual usage. So we actually, in this case, we're taking half of those costs and applying it to actual. So that's better than the ground scenario, ground zero scenario. That is, the worst of all, we take your budget and allocate on budget. Now we're going to do half budget, half variable. So that's an improvement. Okay. Why would we do half on budget? Because that budget pertains to capacity. Because I want you to be honest with me. What capacity do you really want to use? But I don't want you to game with me too much if I apply all of it on your budget capacity, just a fixed amount. Okay, and ultimately we go to the third level, that is, let's just say everything on actual. Okay, actual fixed, actual variable. Then I'm making you totally responsible. Guess what? Me as the service provider, then I don't care now because I'm charging you everything. Anyone rings up and wants help? Sure, we'll just book it up. We'll book it up to your division. More hours, great. We make more money, and then we don't care because you're wearing total responsibility based on actual usage, you see? So one scenario is you're playing games with me, the organisation, on the budget. The other scenario is, well, the service department doesn't have to care about what they actually provide in services because all of the costs are going to be allocated on actual. You with me? So that's not perfect. The first scenario is not perfect. And so a lot of organisations, they'll go in between. Part budget, part actual. Okay? So it's easy to answer that question, why half and half, by looking at the two extremes. Okay, total budget or total actual. All right, and so here we can use actual usage, budgeted usage as an allocation base. As the budgeted usage of peripheral division changes, then the allocation can change. See, micro divisions, budget usage doesn't change. Actual usage. Peripheral divisions usage changes. Now, if we just allocate on budget, then the allocation is the same, no matter what scenario, the 1, 2, 3 scenario. If we allocate based on actual, then peripheral division gets less, less, and less. Why? Because they use less, less, and less. Guess what? Micro division gets more here. Okay? Even though their hours stays the same. All right? So there is potential for gameplay under all these different approaches. So keep that in mind when you're doing the calculations. So this is a very taxing example that I just want to start right at the start of the lecture, this example. What I want to do now is remind you, be careful when you're doing this calculation. That is in your lecture notes. Do a big circle around here, be careful, this can be very confusing. So this is an allocation based on the supply of capacity. And the reason is that we may want to reserve some of this capacity and charge back to the computer division and say, you know, you're partly responsible for the investment that we've made. And if you haven't grown the services you've given to these divisions and not using all this capacity, then you've got to have some responsibility for this. You can't just charge out everything to the user departments. You over-invested. You promised too much to the Capital Investment Committee about how much capacity you want. You should take some responsibility. So that's what this part allocation of capacity is about, making the service division responsible for some unused capacity. Okay, so ultimately the service division should have only planned for 12,000 hours, not 18,000. They spent one half more. Why spend so much? Out of control? No? Yes, out of control. Okay, so that's very potentially confusing. So keep that in mind. This is a calculation using the dual rate method. Again, there's a fixed and a variable rate. 160 per hour for fixed costs. That's based on 8,000 budgeted hours. The variable cost is based on actual. Here, for this side here, your budgeted hours was 4,000, your actual was 3,000. Remember, 4 down to 3. But you got the dual rate operating, and you got the allocation here. Now the fixed cost of unused computer capacity is 160 per hour times the 6,750. That wasn't allocated. Why? Because you're using at 160, you're only allocating that fixed cost to 8 plus 4, 12,000. You still haven't allocated it to the other 6,750 hours. So who bears the cost of that? You may say, oh, it's a computing division. You've got to wear that cost. So just be careful. This can be very confusing. The purpose of this extended example is just to make you aware that it's not just... The idea is not just allocate all the costs away from the service division. The idea is the service division in part has to be responsible for its capacity planning. Okay? Organisations have huge IT investments, everyone around the world. Okay? So you can't just say, oh, just blame the users. It's IT investment so sophisticated, planned and controlled that IT specialists need to take responsibility of how much capacity the users want. You know, in part, as the users need to take some responsibility. So that's what this is about here. And that's why it goes on to, and we're looking at fixed costs only, why we allocate only part of the fixed costs, because we want to control capacity. And the big question is, who should be responsible for the excess capacity? Have you seen this slide? All right, and then we can allocate costs by behaviour. All right, let's... are you up to the quiz? Do you have the quiz questions? How many of you have got the quiz questions in front of you that you downloaded? Only half of you?
Because the lecture handout is uploaded completely. I think it's
yesterday, right? Were they emailed to you?
No, I haven't printed out because yesterday I
I'm happy. What I'd like to do, I can email it to you. It doesn't. It's much better than you having to go to the web, right? No? All right, so I'll just email it to you, yes? Now, if you all have you joined the Yahoo groups, MA 207? So I can attach it and send it to that. If you allow the Yahoo group to forward any emails to it into your POP server or your Gmail or whatever, then you actually receive an email with the attachment. Okay, you don't even have to go to Yahoo groups. You don't even have to go to the WebCT. Okay, and it goes straight to you. All right? MA207 is the Yahoo group. I politely recommend, I'm very polite, right? I politely recommended that you might want to join the Yahoo groups. Did I say that in the first week? Yes. Okay, well, maybe it's a good idea, huh? Because those who did receive it would have received, put your hands up if you received the message from me for the talk I gave to the MBA students last Friday night. Yes. And did you receive the download link for the voice file and the video? You would have received that, right? Because you're part of Yahoo groups, right? Yes? I think I send it to all your emails too, I'm not sure. All right? But I do make sure I send it to the Yahoo groups. So that was fun. Was last Friday night useful, Felix? Good? Yeah. Oh, one person liked it. So, no, there was others that found it useful too, so that was good. All right. So we want to allocate cost by behaviour. Here's a quiz. Let me skip over that. You can take the quiz in your own time, okay? So we're allocating costs. I want to go over the last part before we leave. Okay, let's talk about a topic that's very, very important, and that is where you go for lunch. Okay, how many of you go to that beautiful restaurant just over here called Maxim's? Put your hand up. Okay, how many of you have stopped going to that restaurant? Okay, yeah, somebody, I understand. All right, now it's possible that Maxim's was in a commercial organisation, then the charge of Maxim's needs to be charged to user departments, because normally the food is subsidised. And that's what should happen in the university. I don't think it directly happens in the university. How would you think is the best way to allocate costs of the Maxim's subsidy? So a subsidy that just knocks $10 off every meal that you know, your chicken rice is only $23 compared to Cafe de Coral $35, right? Okay, that's a subsidy that the university pays. Okay, that's a subsidy that has to be paid by some user. So how would you like to allocate that to across the university? Any ideas? Come on, you're accountants. Here's a cost allocation exercise. We have a user department, we have a service department, Maxim's restaurant. We have users, people. How would you allocate those costs? What's the best way to allocate the costs? Help me.
Divide equally amongst everybody.
Divide equally amongst everybody. And so everyone gets a tax, the Maxim's tax, right? Just added on to student costs, right? Okay, so now you're saying that, oh, because for every person they're going to use the restaurant equally. No? Yes, that's what you're saying. So what you're saying now is that you're using an allocation based on cause and effect, or based on benefits received. Okay? Not based on fairness, not based on ability to pay, right? But Maxim's has a sign out the front saying for staff and students only, right? So I'm assuming that's why we do that, because staff and students end up having to pay, or students do anyway, okay, your fees. But if you go there in the morning, we've got all these non-students that come in and eat. And actually there's a lot of students older than me in the Maxim's restaurant having breakfast there. They just fill it up every morning. They're getting a free lunch, a free subsidy. They don't have to pay. Should they have to? I don't know. My suggestion was that you should have to show your ID card. Oh, no, anyone can go to Maxim's restaurant, and so you've got your $30 rice, you show your ID card and you get 25% off.
Like the bookstore.
Yeah, something like that, just like the bookstore, yeah. All right? Your users, you're paying for this, for your fees. So, but you don't care because the transaction costs are so low to, you know, you've got many other things on your mind, right? You've got bigger You've got bigger elephants to kill, yes? Bigger lions to catch. Not worry about this little thing. Okay, so I understand that. But cost allocation, that's all what cost allocation is about. Okay, that's all we're doing. We're just trying to link cause and effect in the organisation. That's all we're doing. There's nothing special other than that. So you need to, if you're in an organisation, you get into cost allocation, you just need to put your negotiation cap on. You need to put your EQ. How many of you got good EQ? Hands up if your EQ is quite high. You need to have good EQ. All right, the emotional quotient. You need to have that good social skills to convince people when you want to change cost allocations in your organisation. You can't just use an accounting, oh, here's the cost benefits received, because there's a lot of politics in organisations that set the way things are allocated. You know that. So here's one last way I'll teach you how to allocate. One is by direct, one is by step. Step method is a little bit more accurate than direct method. So what do we mean? So all we mean, we've got support departments, accounting, information system, we just allocate them to user departments. That's all we're doing. And so we ignore the cross service between other departments. Cafeteria provides services to custodial. Custodial means security. I see security people in Maxims. But under direct we don't allocate. We allocate directly to other parts of the organisation. So let's have a look at a real one. So we might have support departments, maintenance, information systems. And we can allocate these directly to operating departments. And then the big question is, well, what basis do we use? Okay, so here's our operating departments, maintenance, information systems, we allocate to the machining and assembly. And here's how we allocate. So we could allocate the cafeteria based, here's a better example, cafeteria based on number of employees. So how many employees in machining? 20. How many in assembly? 50. So what's the allocation base? 50 employees. So whatever the cost of cafeteria, divide by 50 and do the allocation. That's direct, it's very easy, QED, quite easily done. So that's why when we got the allocation here, it's very easy. We have 360,000 divided by, times 20 divided by 50, and there's the allocation for machining. And for assembly, it's a 30 employees divided by 50, we've got the allocation for assembly. You see that? That's the direct method. That's the simplest way to allocate costs among departments. All right, and then we can have square feet for allocating custodial. Custodial is security services. If you occupy a larger area, then you should allocate more. Okay? And so there's the calculation there. Okay, then we go to the step method, which is the final method I want you to understand. The final method. And this is where we decide, does custodial provide more services to this one, or this one provide more services to custodial? That's a subjective decision that you make, or you might make it on the basis of which department has the larger costs. Okay, cafeteria may have larger costs, so then we should allocate them across all remaining 3 departments. Custodial smaller costs, we just do direct allocation with that. So then we've got steps. So now we've got a 2-step method. All right, so we're allocating this first department to 1, 2 and 3, not just to 1 and 2. The second one just goes to 2. All right, so now we've got some part of the plant maintenance going information system. This is an example you look in the textbook. To keep the example simple, we'll go back to our cafeteria and custodial. And now we're going to allocate cafeteria, the 360,000, to custodial, machining and assembly. So now the denominator for the allocation base changes from 50, that's 20 and 30, to 60. You see that? And so let's allocate cafeteria, shall we? So now we have 10, 20 and 30, and so we allocate 10 divided by 60 to custodial, 10 divided by 60 to machining, and 20 divided by 60 for machining, and 30 divided by 60 for assembly. See that? Okay. Now, custodial, how much are we allocating for custodial? How much are we allocating? Now we're allocating 150,000, not 90. You see that? See, all costs have to get down to these two at the end. You've got to make these down to zero. This is still not zero. You have to allocate 150 to get this down to zero, no? Right? So let's do that. We've got 150,000 to allocate. How are we going to allocate it? We now still have the same basis. 50, 25 over 75, and then we have 50 over 75. And there you have it. Okay, there's the allocation. Okay? So we can have a quiz. We can have a quiz. So we have administration. How many of you got this in front of you? Just some of you, but not all of you. Okay. Okay, I won't go too many of these. But you can do this in your head. If you had admin, you've got to allocate 180,000 to 1, 2 and 3 under step method. If we use number of PCs, number of employees for admin, we're using personal computers for computer services. So 180,000, if we're using direct method, how many employees do we need to allocate that across? 100, 20 plus 80. For the 90,000 under the direct method, how many PCs do we allocate the 90,000 across? 120. So you got the idea. For step method, if we allocate admin to BACS first, now the basis for BAC for admin goes from 100 to 105. You see that? Okay, that's under step method. So I think they're the answers there. I think they're shown in lecture notes. So we have 100 for allocation of admin. We have 120 allocation for the BACS, for the admin allocation here. And there's some answers there. Most of you don't have this in front of you, so I don't want to bore you with that. Okay? Make sure you get your lecture notes firsthand. Okay? We'll just have to finish the lecture early. So we have allocating common costs. That's the last part. Here's what I want. Two last things. I just want to tell you what you don't need to know. Learning objective number 5. You don't have to worry about. Learning objective number 6 and learning objective number 7. Is that clear? Oh, see this here? Okay, what does that mean? No, don't worry about that, okay? Just on a final note, so today I spent some time going through some of the technical allocation. We did some quantitative, all right, so it can be a little bit boring. Okay, and I know you most don't like budgeting, but when you have lecture notes, do read the following. Things like Richard Scammell, the Senior IT Manager of Motorola. This is what he actually said. If there's 2,000 people in a town, we allocate according to by the number of 2,000 and then charge to each the total you'd likely object. If it doesn't work in power, why should it work in IT? So what he's saying there is it's not a straightforward thing to just allocate cost to everyone in the organisation. If there are 2,000 people in an organisation, you just don't give everyone 1/2,000th charge of the total IT expenses. It's a very complicated thing because there's many dimensions to IT. There's the web side, there's the cloud server side, there's software service, there's other integrated services that are provided by IT in most organisations. Every organisation has social media / website, large organisations anyway. Okay, so it's even more complicated than what was 10 years ago. Some other examples. So Vice President CIO, that's Chief Information Officer of Specialty Metals Manufacturer. It's way too much work. It's never-ending debate over what constitutes fair share. What did I say last week about the basis for cost allocation? There's cause and effect, benefits received, fairness, ability to bear. And which ones are most popular? Cause and effect and benefits received. Okay, you know that. And that's probably the basis of a lot of the questions that we go through this semester. It is very hard to do it in reality. It is hard. So be aware of that. And here's another example from the real world. And another example I'll leave you with. Here, Vice President of Process Improvement, Brady Corp of US company. If all you do is reshuffle costs within the company, then chargeback isn't worth it. But if you think that people make better decisions by being forced to confront the costs, then there's value. That's what I tried to talk about today. All right? Whatever you do, start with what decision are you trying to change, or what performance dimension are you trying to change? How do you change a decision? By giving more accurate information. How do you change performance? By making people accountable. Making people realise that they don't get something for free. Okay? So for example, before you go out of the lecture today, can you be sure to empty the bin on the way out? Because now the university's decided that they want to save costs, pay more money to professors, and they don't employ cleaners anymore. So now you have to take responsibility for cleaning this lecture theatre. So every one of you, can you just check to make sure that there's no rubbish in front of you? Okay, so now you're very aware of the service costs associated with cleaning, no? Are you with me? Now, because companies don't do that, I don't force you to do that, how do we make you aware of that? By actually allocating a cost to you, your department. Now I make you aware of that service exists. Now, the worst thing that can happen is that awareness becomes too strong that you decide, I don't want you anymore. Because I found that I can go on the website and I can get someone cheaper to do this. All right? One department decides to do that, then other departments might follow, and then the company may lose control over a critical service. And so allocate costs, but not to the extent that you lose the strategic intent of having the service in the company in the first place. Okay? So we did cover today, yes, we want to split costs into fixed and variable. That's a great idea. Why? Because the fixed costs don't change, and we want a bit more accuracy in planning for capacity, right? And then the variable is great, but also it also signaled to users that, if you go outside and get something for $200, we're still going to charge you the fixed cost. So you better only use the variable cost component we're charging you in working out what is relevant in whether you should outsource or not. Okay? So keep these things in mind. Let's finish the lecture now. And if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to ask with you. Okay? The midterm test is next Thursday. There is no class on Tuesday. There are no classes on Tuesday afternoon. Okay? That is the balanced scorecard game we'll play after the midterm test, not next week, week after. The midterm test will have consist of some multiple choice questions and some I think 2 problem-based questions. Computational.
Like the one we do in tutorials?
Yes. Okay. Any questions?
How long will the exam be?
How long will the midterm test be?
2 hours?
No, it will not be longer than 90 minutes. We'll make it shorter if we can. 2 hours is too long for a test. It's not nice to make you do a test for 2 hours.
Can we leave after the test, or are you teaching after the test?
I'm not teaching.